Hello everybody! Today I will be sharing with you my favorite pumpkin bread recipe for the fall time. I started out by measuring 2 cups of flour, or 9 ounces. I did this by weight because I find it's more accurate than using a measuring cup, since depending on how packed your flour is, you'll get a different amount every time. Now I put in 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, about a 1/2 teaspoon of ground cloves, along with a 1/2 teaspoon of ginger, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, and a teaspoon of fresh ground nutmeg. And then I grabbed the smallest whisk that I have to just mix it all together and get it all incorporated. And then just set that aside. Now moving on to the wet ingredients. I started by creaming 3/4 of a cup of softened butter, and I did use salted butter for this, and I typically do when I'm baking because that's what we have in the house, but most bakers use unsalted butter just to make sure that there isn't too much salt in whatever you're making, since most recipes also call for salt, but it's a matter of preference. And I always cream my butter before I add in my sugar, because if you get the butter lighter and fluffier, it will actually help mix in the sugar. It makes everything a lot easier if you do it beforehand. Once your butter is looking soft and fluffy, you add in 2 cups of sugar. I like to do this gradually, maybe add a cup at a time or slowly put it in while you blend it together. This, once again, just makes it more evenly incorporated. Next, we are going to be adding 2 eggs. Now, for this recipe, you want to have room temperature eggs. This is actually because an egg's viscosity is lower when it is at room temperature, which makes it easier to blend into the batter and keeps it from seizing up with the butter. And also only adding 1 egg at a time to ensure that they incorporate evenly. Next, we will be adding in our pumpkin puree, and I always mix this in about 2 or 3 additions just to make sure not to overload the batter. And one note about this is, don't worry if your batter gets a little bit split or curdled. That's just because of all the moisture you just added in with the eggs and then the pumpkin. But it will all be resolved once the flour is added in, and you can even add a little bit in the middle to help stabilize your batter. Alright, now that we have got the pumpkin all mixed in, it is time to add our dry ingredients. I added a little bit of extra pumpkin pie spice into the mix, just to make sure that we had enough flavor going on. Now I add the flour in 2 or 3 additions. Because there is so much in this bowl, you want to be careful with it. You would put your mixer on low, or if you're doing it by hand, that would be even better. I always go in with a spatula at the end and mix it by hand, just to make sure that my batter isn't overmixed, so that it will be gummy after it's baked. Nobody wants that. I also added chocolate chips into this pumpkin bread just to add some more flavor, and it is very delicious that way. Now we're going to prepare our pan. I used a bunt tin for this, but you can use whatever kind of pan or container you have to bake this in. And I started off by buttering it. I used about 2 tablespoons of butter and just was sure to get into all of the crevices, and always be sure to wash your hands before doing this step. Then I dusted my tin with probably an eighth of a cup of flour, once again just to ensure that no sticking occurs during baking. Now just spoon in your batter evenly into your container. You want to be sure to smooth it out or just tap it on the table at the end to make sure that there are no air bubbles in there. But I would recommend spooning it in for this particular recipe since the batter is so thick. You won't have much success if you try to pour it in. And now it is time to pop it into the oven. I put it in the oven for about an hour and 5 minutes, just because it is so dense, and the oven temperature was at 350. I did start at 50 minutes, but then increase it up to an hour and 5 minutes, checking to see if it was baked. And there it is out of the oven. I put it onto this display board, gently cutting around the edges just to make sure that I could get it all out in one piece. But since we buttered and floured it earlier, that should be no problem. And I just turn it out and voila! A simple but delicious recipe, perfect for the fall. Thank you for watching.